go to the book of Kings, First Kings, in chapter 17, 18, and 19, we meet the man called Elijah. Of course, at this point, we are at the decline of the kingdoms. As soon as David dies in chapter 1, First Kings, Solomon takes over, and then after Solomon, the kingdoms decline, unfortunately. What I want us to look at today is how does Elijah trouble Israel? That's a question I want to ask. There's a paper I've written on that, by the way. I've sent it out. I don't know if it has reached you. But perhaps also speaking on it, because it's, the challenge we have nowadays is that we have this the way of the world of entertainment. You can't repeat a message even for emphasis. Once you've shared it, you can't say it. People get bored. That is good somehow, but it's very wrong also on the other hand, because the reason some things are repeated there are for emphasis. The point of preaching or teaching is not to find something new all the time. It is to make sense all the time. And we can't find something new. That is why you don't get to grade 12 if you have not passed grade 8. There are basics there's a build-up. There are things we have to understand before. But what we have, and this is a very unfortunate thing that we have, it's a wrong mentality as a church, that we're always looking for something new. We get bored quickly. We have a curious mind. We have curious minds. We're looking for new concepts, new ways of saying it, new philosophical approach. You can't simply say nowadays that God loves you. Okay, so what? Say it nicely. Put some rhetoric into it. It's some eloquence. That's not really a spiritual thing, I must say. As much as it appeals to senses, but we must also not hate simplicity. We must not, because in wanting to be eloquent and also in trying to use rhetoric, people are likely to invent their own truths instead of the truth. Anyways, I want us to look at this one thing. How does Elijah trouble Israel? I'm having the paper here. I'm just gonna go through it with you. For those who want to see it, I can send it to them. And I'm yet to actually write another part of this paper where about the fate of King Ahab, the one who refused the counsel of Elijah. But before I get into it, let me also speak of our historical understanding of Elijah. The Adventist Church, and this is a question I don't want you to quickly conclude. I want you to think about this. Can the Adventist Church today claim to be an Elijah? First of all, when you meet the first Elijah, in 1 Kings chapter 17, he is the man who lives on the countryside. Ellen White tells us about him, that he lived on the countryside. He did not enjoy the life in the cities. He was not included in the flourishing life of the nation in the cities. He was just a prayerful man living on the countryside of the nation, where he prayed that God intervenes in the situation of Israel, because he was concerned that Israel would provoke God and by that bring to themselves condemnation. So I want to ask a question, and this is a question I asked when I was going through university doing theology. I studied in Kenya. The university in Kenya is situated in a very, very, very rural area. Like it's in a deep, it's very rural, deep rural area. There, you need to plan to go to a real town. You need to plan if you want to go to a real town. At the same time, the division offices of that division, the East African division, they are in Nairobi, the cosmopolitan of the country, more like Johannesburg, if I may. So then I was asking myself this question, and I want you to please follow closely, because I'm not here insinuating. What I'm saying is all there is. There's nothing behind it. I was asking myself a question. How do we? Because people speak of rural living. how do we promote rural living? Because it seems that everyone loves the city life. There's convenience here. I mean, you have running water. You have many things that you can think of that are convenient on this part of the world. And you even look at our generally. You may disagree, but generally you look at our. We are vegetarian, yes, most of us, but you also look at the value though. This expensive but simple diet, and you ask yourself a question, and this is a question that I want to ask you before I go into I get into what I want to speak of mainly. Can you say that we are an Elijah? Are we a simple people, individually or as an organization? Are we a simple organization, or are we a simple people? Okay. Because even if when you go to John the Baptist, he's not part of the system. That's the second Elijah. He lives in the wild, a life of self-denial. He's not like those of this world. He does not accumulate. He just preaches and goes back to the wilderness. Preaches, goes back to the wilderness. And again, moreover, we say that because of prophecy. Remember that both men, Elijah and John the Baptist, John the Baptist being the second Elijah, were not necessarily fighting with kings. They offended the women behind the kings, all right? And so it's Jezebel who's offended by Elijah, and thus pushes the king Ahab to deal with Elijah. And she herself also kills the prophets of God. You go to the New Testament, John the Baptist rebukes Herod. The wife of Herod, who had been the wife of Philip, the brother to Herod, is the one who has John killed. Prophecy says the kings of this world will form a union with a harlot, which we say is a denomination in our interpretation. And when we rebuke the doings of that denomination through the system, then the denomination will influence the king, the governments of the world, to then persecute the saints. That's how we identify ourselves as an Elijah. But for us to stand as an Elijah or as a John the Baptist, there is a sense of being extracted from society, and only to be involved in terms of ministry, but not necessarily to be married to society. Okay, so this is just a question, because what I'm going to ask now, what I'm going to get into, will need one to answer that question on a personal level and also organizationally. Can we look at ourselves and say, yeah, we are the Elijah. We are the Elijah. We bear the image of the Elijah. Can you look at yourself? Can I look at myself as an individual now and say the same? So the question is, how does Elijah trouble Israel? That's where I am. How does Elijah trouble Israel? In chapter 18, what we get is that Elijah goes to Ahab, being sent of God. Of course, Elijah goes to Ahab, chapter 17, and when he goes to Ahab, he tells Ahab that there will be no rain for 3 years. And of course, there's no rain for 3 years. And then in chapter 18, he goes to him. After 3 years, he goes to him, chapter 18, after having been with that woman. He goes to him. And when he meets him, this is what he says. Elijah, this is Ahab greeting Elijah. Oh, Elijah, you, the troubler of Israel. Some version says, are you the Elijah, the troubler of Israel? Now, this is what I want to explain here. In the Hebrew, that word, in the Bible, that word is used 14 times, the word that Ahab uses. It is a word that is used always for someone that provokes God and therefore invites the anger of God towards the nation. I want us to get this. So the troubler is basically a person who, in a situation where we are okay with God, where we are at peace with God, someone does something that offends God, and then God deals with us. So Ahab was saying to Elijah, look, man, are you the one that is causing God to hate Israel? He was saying, are you the one that is causing God to hate Israel? How are you? Because if you go, for instance, if you go to the book of Joshua, chapter 4, you remember, chapter 7, sorry. Achan, you remember Achan? The one who kept aside for himself the things that God has said should not be kept aside. That's why the word is used. But by what he did, it is said that he offended God. He troubled Israel. He invited the anger of God. So in other words, what Ahab was saying was that, look, Israel is okay. You are the problem. You are provoking God. The rain would not have been withheld had it not been for you. Okay? This is Ahab. And this is my question. How does Elijah trouble Israel? If I stood today and said to Israel, remember that Israel here is the nation of the covenant, who see themselves as being exempt from confrontation, who can't be corrected. They are the children of the covenant. They are the children of Abraham. It was Jacob, not Esau, not anybody else to whom the promise was given. So who are you to come and tell us? And while you are at that, and I'm sure now as a thinking person and with the Holy Spirit helping you as you are listening, you can now hear where I'm going with this. Have we not ourselves developed the sense of being exempt from correction? In comparing ourselves with others, because what Israel did, they did not now look up to God. They looked at other nations around them. And because they were the peculiar, the chosen among the nations, it didn't matter what they did so long as they were just not called by the names of other nations. They kept the name Israel, did the things of other nations, but because they kept the name Israel, then they said, you know what, we are beyond, we are exempt from rebuke. We cannot be corrected. Therefore, can you say, and now this is a very important question that each individual must ask themselves before the system does, before the organization does. If I stand to correct the church as a whole, to say to the church, according to the three angels' messages, this is where we're going. The first message is to the world, not to the church. That's not an intimate relationship. That's why he flies in the sky. It's to the world. And he says, fear God and keep his commandments. I want to ask you a question. Being a young preacher nowadays, because we have a situation where some people are saying, these young guys are messing up the gospel now. The church was not like that. Of course, I'm not saying that we are okay. We may have messed up here and there, or altogether. God knows, and But here's the point. This is not in defense of anyone. Who is troubling the system, or the organization, or the domination, or the existing order between the one who rebukes the organization for sleeping on duty and the organization that keeps on forgetting to do what they have to do, to the point that when God shall judge, even the organization shall be judged with the wicked? How does Elijah trouble Israel? In that sense, who is then bringing the wrath of God? Is it I who is saying, as a young preacher, no, guys, the church cannot keep quiet and not say anything about GBV. The church has to speak. Church cannot keep quiet and say nothing about injustices of this world, because this world has injustices. And the three angels' messages border on that, because God is sovereign. This is his dominion. When God is saying to the world, what you are doing is wrong. And by the way, it doesn't mean that when we preach, people will repent. But even when people won't repent, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't preach. And that's where the trick is. Some people think that we shouldn't preach because people won't repent. When we are speaking about things that are affecting the church, which are causing the church not to be able to move forward, people get offended. And they say, these theologians, these theologians. But the question is, before you say these theologians are troubling, who is troubling the system between Elijah and Ahab? Is it okay, therefore, for Ahab to continue disregarding justice just because he is chosen, while people are perishing, while widows are not taken care of, while there's no pragmatic there's no visible pragmatism of the gospel in the lives of the people? I mean, how do we make it to be pragmatic? Let me give you an example. And this is what I've always said, and I'm going to say it. If you are a woman and your husband abuses you, and he is also a Christian and a Seventh-day Adventist, and both of you come to church, okay? And I preach to you and I tell you to be patient. And I keep on telling him to you to be patient, but I don't tell your husband to stop abusing you. Then I'm not preaching from God. I'm biased as a preacher. He also needs to be told that if you are a child of God, then stop abusing your wife. God does not want you to abuse your wife. We must not try to romanticize the gospel and try to comfort those who have done wrong by always focusing on the victims. If a perpetrator claims also to be a child of God, then there must be justice. If you have stolen from me, give back what you stole. If you claim to be the child of God, you can't say that you have now repented, but you're in a position to reinstate, but you don't reinstate. That's not biblical. Who then is troubling Israel? Between the one who sits on the wrong being done and tries to hide it under the carpet and the one who challenges it. And I want to say this, that it is okay for an Elijah to be persecuted. That's the nature of, it comes with the package, it is the nature of his ministry. But Elijah is not the one troubling Israel. Because we know in the eyes of God that it was Ahab. And Elijah said, no, I'm not the one. You and your house. You and your house. You have troubled Israel. Unfortunately today, we don't live in the era of prophets. For myself to preach, some people need to sit and approve of me. And somewhere someone has to say, yeah, no, we can bring him in, we don't mind him. And the church has abused that, in that they have blocked God from speaking to them sometimes. Because whenever you do that, you choose according to the itchiness of your ears, and you don't want the people that will speak and rebuke the organization, the hearts, and the people. It is a good thing that it means that we are organized, but at the same time the devil has used it, even in our midst, to block some people to speak sense into us as believers. Because we change, we choose, We have popular preachers that we expect to preach to us, and some we sideline. And as a result, God does not speak to us as he pleases, because we choose the speakers. And unless we are implying that God has to make sure that he speaks to those whom we prefer, through those whom we prefer, which I don't think that God will succumb to. So where we are at this point, we are dealing with many issues as a church. It is happening in our time, and it has become prevalent, and you have to address it. Do not find yourself accusing people of being the troublers, when actually the troubler is the one who has been sitting on injustices for too long. You need to ask yourself a question. If I say that this guy is causing havoc, how is he causing havoc? Am I disturbing a correctly peaceful system, or a peaceful system that is protecting evil? Because there is a system, there's an order that can be very well established, but it protects evil. That when you come to it, you disturb everything that was there, that was evil. Then you become the troubler. And that was Elijah. And this is a question I want to ask. Are you an Elijah, or are we an Elijah? And how does Elijah trouble Israel? Who is the troubler of Israel? These are the things that I just want to think about. Because where we are going from now onwards, for instance, and I need to speak about this on record now. When you speak about decolonizing Christianity, by the way, there's a book I've written, it's coming out very soon. In fact, it should just be either a day's or a week's time. In a few days or a week's time. That's what I meant. What I'm saying is, we need to decolonize. Why do we need to decolonize? That's what people misunderstand. Decolonizing is not switching religions. It is abandoning some cultural aspects that are not working for us, and maintaining or picking up those that we have left, which would work for us as a Christian church. Decolonization has nothing to do with taking off the face of Christianity. It has everything to do with taking off the mask of another culture that does not seem to benefit Christianity in Africa. For instance, I can say now, you can take me to court if you may, that individualism in the church today is because of the European culture. People are so much self-centered. That's not Christianity. On the other hand, Ubuntu is like collectivism, where one person lives for others, and there's Christianity. So in other words, you see, if you look at the things that we have, the things that we are, how we were raised in the African system to respect others, to respect elders, that system would have benefited the church. Some months back, I preached in a church where we had an afternoon program, and this old person stood up and made a point, and a young fellow wanted to challenge that. The fellow may have been correct, but you can't tell me that was correct for a child to challenge a person intellectually or an adult intellectually like that. That's not how it works. And of course, one will say, then you, pastor, then shouldn't. But I'm doing it with the authority now of the ministry. That's another thing, okay? Which also is also, on the other hand, something that the church has forgotten, to respect the office of the pastor, But what I'm saying is, we need to look at ourselves and ask ourselves this question. When questions come about what I'm saying now, I'll be able to respond to them maybe if I'll be there on the page to see and respond. But what I want us to ask ourselves is, who is the traveler, the true traveler, between the one who is warning us against our having parted from the right way, and the one who says, no, the new way of doing things is wrong? Is the old way of doing things correct? Is God pleased in it? Are we fulfilling Matthew 25? Are we reading and waiting and watching and praying? Are we? Are we using the talents to bring in more people? Are we? Are we taking care of the needs of the poor? Are we visiting prisons, or we only do it once a year? Yeah. Global Youth Day. Ministry is a day-to-day job. You can't go once a year to take pictures and say you fulfill the ministry. That's not how ministry works. So, and I'm not ridiculing or looking down upon what we have achieved, but this is how it has been lost. That we have lost our stand as a church. Why are we here? What errand have we here as a church? And because of that, ask yourself a question: who is the traveler? Who troubles the other? How does Elijah trouble Israel? That's very important. Just ask yourself a question. If you think that I'm troubling you, if you think that I'm coming up with something new, how am I doing it? What does it disturb? Does it disturb a system where one person sits comfortably and abusing others? Does it unseat the person? Does it challenge the person? Because that's a question you ask yourself. If it disturbs that, then you must know the troubler is the one who's being disturbed, not the one who's disturbing. How does Elijah trouble Israel in light of Matthew 25? As Jesus told us we should be participating in ministry, in light of the three angels' messages. Who is the troubler? Just go look, take your time and look at it. Who is the troubler really? Where are we supposed to be? And may God bless you.